Our vision at Expo has actually stayed pretty consistent over the years. We want to make mobile development accessible for everyone and delightful for developers. In practice, this has often meant being very much influenced and inspired by things, solutions, and capabilities that come from the web. And this is because React Native is so accessible for web developers. So when folks come over from the web, they often bring their tools, ideas, expectations from web dev, and thus we find ourselves trying to use these tried and tested web solutions in native. And it kind of works, but what we're seeing time and time again is that tailor-made solutions, much like tailor-made clothes, specifically for the mobile platform and for the unique capabilities, and let's be honest, restrictions, for React Native fit a whole lot better. Over the years, many of the previously painful and complicated things when it comes to building React Native apps have come a long way. We now have excellent tailor-made tools for building, debugging, and deploying our apps. Some for us at Expo, others from the community, from Software Mansion, ColdStack, Infinite Red, and many others. So now, we want to look what happens to your app after we ship them to production. Beyond the analytics and the crash reporting tools we already have and that are often borrowed from the web. How can we make observability a tailor-made solution for React Native? Hello, my name is Kadi Kraman. I'm a developer success engineer at Expo, and this talk is about how your app is actually doing in production. This is how we all wish versioning worked in React Native. Let's just take a look and take a moment to appreciate the simplicity. You deploy a version, and everyone's using it. You deploy the next one, and everyone switches over. You find an issue and you roll back, no problem, everyone switches over. Unfortunately, that is not our reality. Because there is no built-in way for app stores to prompt for users to upgrade, versioning for native apps looks more like this. When you publish your version 1 of your app and everyone starts using it, this is the best it's going to get. With every new update, you will have a gradual adoption from the previous versions to the new ones, where some users actually never update. And speaking of updates, if you are using over the updates, my goodness, as powerful and amazing that they are, the complexity when it comes to versions multiplies. So as soon as you push an over-the-air update to a single version, this splits that version's users, the code path they're using, into two, with the embedded update and the new update. Furthermore, depending on how you handle the initial installs from the stores, new users might be using the embedded update first and then gradually migrate over. This is to say that if you are just looking at performance analytics from your app at any one time, at any point in time, you are not getting a good picture of what is actually happening, because the data is coming from a plethora of versions. Here's another somewhat frightening reality. The app that you are developing locally is not actually the same app that your users are using. And this is not just about not being the latest version that you're developing, but also you are developing your application, which means that you have all these dev tools, observers, debugging utilities in your computer that allow you to inspect and speed up writing code. However, for production, we build a completely separate bundle. We have a minified, hopefully Hermes bytecode bundle. We have optimized app bundles, so that the version that the user is using is hopefully faster and better, but how do we know for sure? Furthermore, if you are a conscientious developer, you probably have, who has a separate test device outside of your main device? You're amazing. Just for anyone who didn't see, that is like half the audience. The other half of the audience, talk to your employer. If you're a React Native developer, iOS and Android, having a test device for the other platform, huge improvement. However, unfortunately for us, our users have about 300 different devices, and no one's going to be doing that. And lastly, well, one of the many last things, but the nature of mobile apps is that while you're developing in perfect network conditions, hopefully with 300, 500 megabit internet, your users, because they are on the go, are not going to have such perfect conditions. So that's why the app that you're developing locally is not the same as what the users are using. So what we want is to measure performance in the real world, in these crazy conditions, in the metro, on the plane, on users' crazy phones where they have 2% battery because they're lunatics. We want to see what the real users are seeing across devices, locations, situations, and versions. And this is where Observe comes in. Observe is our brand new open source library coupled with its namesake on EAS. And it is designed to capture, record, and help you make sense of real performance metrics and logs from your apps in production. This is how Observe works. We have an open source library called Expo Observe, and this is in charge of capturing and transmitting metrics, events, and logs from your user's production app and sending it to a dedicated OpenTelemetry collector. This endpoint is replaceable. By default, we'll send it to our EAS Observe collector, which we will then use to store and help you analyze, contextualize, and act on this data. To get started with Observe, there's 3 simple steps. You install the library, you add a higher order component to the root of your app, and you call Mark Interactive to your app's entry point screens. So these are the first screens that the user could potentially land on when they first open the app. So usually it's going to be your index route, but for example, if you have onboarding or login or deep linking, then also those routes. And just with those 3 steps, after a rebuild, you'll instantly be able to see the app's startup metrics on the Observe dashboard. So what are startup metrics? We're talking about from when the user taps on the app icon on the phone to when they actually start using your app. They start scrolling, start typing. And this consists of launch time, which is from when the process is created to when the system is finished allocating memory. And an interesting thing you might not know about launch time is that it can be warm or cold. So you might not know this, but your operating system on your phones has the capability to, under some conditions, pre-warm your app process. So as developers, we don't have control over when this happens, although there are things that we can do to make it more likely. So for example, if you're the kind of person that wakes up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the first thing you do is you open Instagram and do some scrolling, then your phone learns this, and by 7:50, Instagram is pre-warmed, so you can save those milliseconds and start scrolling faster. Then we have the bundle load time, which is from when the launch time finishes to loading your JavaScript bytecode and evaluating it. We have time to render. This is when the React root component is rendered. And then we have time to interactive, which is the one you had to mark manually, which is when the user can actually start using their app. So the reason we have you mark it manually is because you could be doing things in your app that prevents the user from actually interacting with your screen. So you could be hiding the splash screen and doing something in the background. You could be fetching old state. You could be downloading an OTA update. You could be fetching some data. During all of this time, the user is there just wanting to be using your app. And all of this information is hidden if you aren't tracking it via metrics. So all of this data is captured with metadata about the device you're using, the app versions, the location. And for TTI metrics, we also add metadata about the device state, so whether the battery is full, whether they're on Wi-Fi, whether they've seen any dropped frames. And you can actually add any custom objects here as well, anything that you want to track for that particular screen, it will show up here. Cool. So startup, great. But what about when you're already in the app? we're tracking metrics for the initial screen, so the initial open. But what if that's not where the bottleneck is? Your app hopefully has more than one screen, and the actual problematic screen might be deeper. Well, the good news is we also have tracking for per-screen metrics with Expo Router and React Navigation. This is not enabled by default because navigation metrics may or may not be sensitive to you depending on what your app is. So it is up to you to evaluate and send the metrics as you deem appropriate. To enable it, we just, in the configure object, enable the Expo Router or React Navigation integration and call mark interactive on all the remaining screens. That's it. And after a rebuild, you'll be able to see the cold and warm time to render and time to interactive on all your screens. All right, recall my complaints about how versioning is so very frustrating? Well, with Observe, you can easily see which versions of your app your users are actually using. So in this example, we have two app versions. We have a 1.0.0 and 1.0.1. And then here on the right, we can see the users and installs for both of these versions. So installs means we have seen that user on this version ever. And users means that the latest metrics we have of them is of this version. So we can, with reasonable confidence, know that this is where they're using. And this becomes more useful as you have more builds, because as we know that just having an app version 1.0.1 doesn't mean that it's the same app binary. So when you're building on EAS, for instance, you can see each of the builds. You can link to them as well with the little arrow here, and you can see exactly how many users are using which build. So in this example, a very common use case, you can see this build number 14 was used ever by one user, and is currently used by no one. So this was obviously built by a developer, pushed a test flight, oh no, I made a mistake, build another one, and that's the one that gets pushed out to users. And of course, we can also do this with updates. So if you're using ES updates, you can link the update from here to the actual update that was published and see exactly how many users are on which versions. And all of these are filters. So all the metrics that you've added, you'll be able to filter by individual updates, versions, or build numbers. Speaking of EAS update metrics, wouldn't it be useful to see how a new update is performing compared to the previous or even existing median? Here's an example of an update that was pushed that significantly increased the minimum time to render by a minimum of 500%. And if you look at the median download time for it is clear to see that it is taking unusually long to download for some reason, perhaps due to some unoptimized images. You can also then peek, when you find an outlier, you can peek into all events for that user for that session, including the startup events, navigation events, custom events, and download events. So I'm actually the most excited about this screen because there is a lot of stuff coming here. Eventually, this will be the user's entire journey from when they open the app to whatever they're doing, and you can customize this to be as descriptive as you need, including perhaps some third-party integrations. And for the events, you're able to see the metadata about the device as well as any custom params you might want to add. Speaking of customization, we also wanted to give you the freedom to capture any performance or behavior events you can imagine. So we've added a custom events functionality, which means you can capture any serializable data you can imagine. All of these events will be available on the dashboard, and we're working on a feature where you can also query by each of the keys and values that you set. All right, it is somewhat shocking that I am nearing the end of this presentation, and I have yet to mention agents. I know, I'm surprised I haven't been booed off the stage. But don't worry, we have, of course, built Observe with agentic development in mind. So to keep your data where you are the most comfortable, you can use Observe with any AI agent of your choice. Because that's the dream, right? So rather than just going on a dashboard and you having to be the one to figure out which metrics are not working as expected, you want to, in plain text, interact with your data and ask questions and have your agent do the work. And with Observe, you can. You might have noticed it's a little handoff to AI button in some of the screenshots I showed earlier. Clicking this will let you copy a prompt which you can add to your AI agent, and this will instruct it on how to make sense and query the data we've collected. This will be, well, non-deterministic because it depends on the data in your app. But this is just an example. What it's going to do is it's going to query the data from the last 2 weeks, and depending on what it finds, asks you what area you want to dig into. We also have a skill, observe skills. We also have an observe skill in Expo skills. So we have a skill for installing. So rather, if you don't want to do, npx expo install, you can use the skill to have observe automatically set up and configured. We have a skill for metrics. So this is understanding the metrics we're collecting and the thresholds, and if any, in case of outliers, how to improve things. And queries, how to query and interpret the data. This was just a glimpse of what we've built so far, and we have a lot of things planned next. I think out of these, I am most excited about request timing. So one of the things we're looking into is actually being able to time all the requests that happen within your app. So per screen, when you saw the session timeline, you should be able to see all the requests that happen when the screen is opened, which ones happen at the same time. So you'll be able to see, oh, my app is slow because I'm running 10 requests continuously. We also have plans for alerting, so you could set specific thresholds you want to monitor and then be able to get Slack or email alerts. And we have, well, lots of things planned. And finally, I am thrilled to announce that as of right now, ES Observe is in public beta. So it will be free for up to 10K monthly active users on all plans for at least 3 months. Yeah. So if you found any of this interesting, please give it a shot. And if you do, I've added a link to our Discord. Please join our Discord. There is an Observe channel. We'll be looking into it. Please feel free to tag me if you have any questions, problems, ideas you want to integrate with your own library. I am very excited for us all to build the best observability system tailored for React Native. Thank you very much.